Good evening and welcome. You're listening to Boring History for Sleep, where we let the past unfold slowly, calmly, like the gentle flicker of an oil lamp in a quiet room. Tonight, we travel to ancient Rome, not the glory of the Colosseum, not the triumphs of emperors or the chants of the Senate, but something quieter, something more enduring, more ordinary. We will begin this journey in the heavy silence of early morning, when the streets of Rome are not yet crowded and the city belongs to its shadows. You'll imagine yourself not as a senator nor a soldier, but as a public slave bound, not by chains, but by routine, by hunger, by the demands of a system that will never know your name. From there, we'll follow the rise and fall of Cicero, a man who soared with his words and stumbled into exile. We'll then descend into the hush of mystery beneath Rome's streets, into secret altars where torchlight met silence in the cult of Mithras. And finally, we will be seated at the table of a Roman patrician, where silver clinks softly and expectations are dressed as rituals. This is a quiet Rome, not the one you were taught, but one that breathes slowly and waits patiently for you to drift alongside it. Let's begin. Segment 1. Why you wouldn't last a day as a Roman public slave. Imagine waking before the light, not to the warmth of choice, but to the call of obligation. There is no bed, only a thin straw pallet tucked into a stone corner, cold even in midsummer. The air smells faintly of oil, damp plaster, and yesterday's sweat. There are others near Usulent, half-awake bodies, stirring in a low communal dormitory meant for Rome's public laborers. You are a servus publicus, a public slave, not the private property of a household, but the property of the Roman state. You are not free, but your master is the city itself. Your day begins with quiet movement, no voices raised, no greetings exchanged. Speaking too freely might draw attention, and attention is rarely good. Instead, you join the quiet shuffle of sandals against stone floors. A basin of cool water waits near the doorway. There is no soap, only a quick splash across your face and arms to scrub away the dust of sleep. Clothing is simple, a worn tunic that once had color, but now sits in a muted gray-brown tone, too often washed, too rarely replaced. Your body has long grown used to this garment, to the way it clings in the summer and stiffens in winter. There is no breakfast, not really. A small piece of coarse bread, perhaps soaked in vinegar water, if you're lucky. The bread is yesterday's, or the day before. It's rough in your mouth, barely a mouthful, but it's enough to keep you upright. The city calls, you walk to your station. Perhaps it is the latrine district, where you empty chamber pots from public toilets into the city's deep cloaca, underground sewer system that pulses like a hidden artery. Or perhaps you serve in the maintenance of roads, hauling gravel, scrubbing stones, filling ruts left by the carts of the wealthy. If you're literate, maybe you spend the day hunched in a magistrate's office, copying scrolls in cramped script, your back aching by the hour. The work is endless, and the hours indistinct. You do not own your time. You do not choose your labor. You do not speak unless spoken to. Yet despite this, you are not invisible. There is always someone watching, a supervisor, a foreman, a freedman with partial authority. You are not beaten regularly. Rome frowns on damaging its own property without cause. But punishment exists. Silence can be a punishment. Cold dismissal, sudden reassignment to harder labor, and always the fear that you might be sold or transferred or sent to the mines. The rhythm of your life is repetition. Sweep, carry, scrape, wait, and always endure. By midday, the heat begins to cling. The Roman sun is not forgiving. The air hums with the buzz of flies and distant street noise. Somewhere, a senator is dining beneath a shaded portico with plump olives and fresh figs. But not you. You crouch in a corner when given a pause. There's water, drawn from a public fountain, cold, metallic, alive with the mineral temps of the aqueducts. You drink it slowly. You have learned to savor small things. Afternoon blends into evening without fanfare. The streets do not quiet. They change tone. More feet pass. Louder carts roll by. Merchants shout their last offerings of the day. And still, you labor clearing debris, relighting street torches, stacking firewood for public baths. As night falls, the city cools. Your work ceases only when dismissed. No clock guides your die, only the word of a man who holds authority over you. Back at the dormitory, the pallet awaits. Your fingers ache. Your knees are raw. Your name is not written anywhere, but you existed. You moved the gears. You kept the city alive in ways no history will note. Tomorrow, you will rise again. This was a day in the life of a Roman public slave, a life of monotony, of labor, of near invisibility. And yet, the empire relied on thousands like you. And now, let us rise from this silence, from stone floors and stiff tunics, to another Roman life, louder, brighter, but still built on the same uneasy ground. Segment 2. The Fall of Cicero. A life of power, letters, and enemies. Let's leave the silence of labor and step into the quieter turmoil of power. Not the battlefield, not the throne, but a study, a forum, a man's voice rising above the din of politics, a man of letters, law, and ambition. Marcus Tullius Cicero. You may know his name, or perhaps only faintly recall it. But in the late Roman Republic, Cicero's voice echoed through marble halls with uncommon precision. And tonight, we will walk through the shadow of that voice, from his careful rise to his gentle, inevitable fall. Imagine yourself in Arpinum, a small Italian town. Born in 106 BCE, Cicero did not come from Rome's ancient noble lines. He was what the Romans called a novus homoa, new man, a man whose family had no political weight. His father, however, was ambitious and educated, and young Marcus was groomed for something greater than provincial life. He was sent to Rome to study rhetoric, philosophy, and law. He learned from the best Greek and Roman teachers, trained in the delicate art of persuasion, not just how to speak, but how to think in the Roman way, methodically, carefully, with gravity and style. Soon, his name began to rise. He was a natural orator, but more than that, he understood people. He could read a room, anticipate fears, and soothe egos. He spoke in calm, flowing Latina style that later generations would imitate for centuries. His first major victory came in the court case Pro Rossio Amarenoa, high-profile defense that set him against powerful men. He won not just the case, but a reputation for courage and clarity, and from there his path was carved. Cicero's political life ascended step by step. Quaestor, aedile, praetor, finally, consul, the highest elected office in the Republic, was achieved in 63 BCE. That year was pivotal. It was the year of the Catiline conspiracy, a shadowy plot to overthrow the Republic. Led by a discontented aristocrat named Lucius Sergius Catilina, Cicero acted swiftly. He exposed the conspiracy in a series of public speeches, the Catilinarian orations, delivered with thunderous calm in the Senate. He named names, demanded action, and Rome listened. Catiline fled. His followers were captured. Cicero ordered their execution without trial. To some, he had saved the Republic. To others, he had violated its laws. His triumph turned slowly. The next decade was not kind to the Republic. Power began shifting. Julius Caesar, Pompey, Crassus, the first triumvirate. Cicero, ever the Republican idealist, found himself increasingly out of place. When Caesar gained power, Cicero refused to join his camp. And when Caesar was assassinated, he believed naively that the Republic might return. He turned his hopes to Octavian, the adopted heir of Caesar, and began to speak out, this time against Mark Antony, who Cicero believed to be dangerous, corrupt, and power-hungry. He wrote and delivered the Philippians a series of speeches attacking Antony. They were eloquent, forceful, but they sealed his fate. The second triumvirate was formed, Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus. To secure their power, they issued proscriptions lists of enemies to be killed. Cicero's name was on that list. In December of 43 BCE, he was caught while trying to flee Italy. He did not resist. Legend says he offered his neck willingly to the soldier's blade. His head and hands were displayed on the rostra, the speaker's platform in the Roman Forum, as a warning to others. But the warning was twofold. It was also a message to Rome itself. Those words alone were no longer enough. And yet, Cicero's words outlived the Republic. His letters, speeches, and philosophical works would shape not only Latin literature, but European political thought for centuries to come. To read Cicero is to read Rome at a moment when it could have chosen a different path. He believed in the Republic not as a perfect thing, but as a fragile balance of honor, tradition, and duty. He died for that belief, quietly, in exile from the tides of power he once navigated so skillfully. And so, as we leave Cicero behind, we drift now not toward the Senate floor, but downward into something older, more secret, a whisper beneath the streets of Rome. It is time to explore a mystery. Segment 3, The Mystery of the Mithraeum, Rome's secret underground faith. Now we descend past the cobbled streets, beneath the grand villas, below the heat and clamor of the Roman day, into the cool silence of the Mithraean underground temple, tucked away in darkness, hidden in plain sight. It is a space of shadow and secrecy, a room of dim oil lamps, rough stone benches, and a single central image. A young man in a Persian cap slaying a bull. You may have never heard of Mithras, and yet, for centuries, in the Roman Empire, his worship spread like whispers in the dark. And tonight, in this quiet hour, we'll walk through the mystery of the Mithraeum and the cult that left behind no sacred texts, only symbols, silence, and stones. Imagine yourself in the 2nd century CE. You are a Roman soldier, stationed on the far frontier, perhaps in Britannia, or along the Danube. The winds are cold, the barracks are crude, the campaigns are unending. But after nightfall, you and a select few descend into a chamber carved beneath the outpost. You enter not as a soldier, but as an initiate, a follower of a hidden god. The temple is narrow and low, intentionally so. You must stoop to pass through the stone arch. Along the walls, 2 stone benches run the length of the chamber. At the end, an altar, and above it, always, the image of Mithras killing the sacred bull. No words are spoken aloud. The rites are secret. What happened within these chambers remains largely unknown. What we do know is pieced together from ruins. The cult of Mithras was what scholars call a mystery religion, faith of initiation, not open worship. It spread quickly across the Roman military, merchant class, and civil servants. Its appeal was curious. It offered not political influence or public favor, but a personal journey, a ladder of symbolic trials. Initiates passed through 7 levels each, associated with a planet, a virtue, perhaps a trial or oath. The titles were evocative: Corax, Nymphus, Miles, Leo, Perses, Heliodromus, and finally, Potter, the Father. Each level may have involved symbolic meals, oaths, and perhaps small reenactments. They were not public spectacles like the great Roman festivals. They were quiet, internal, and deeply meaningful to those who participated, and Mithras himself remains a mystery. Unlike Jupiter, Mars, or Isis, Mithras has no surviving holy scriptures. His myth was likely transmitted orally, preserved only in stone carvings and frescoes. The central image, the tauroctony, or bull slaying, was consistent across hundreds of temples. In it, Mithras kneels upon a bull, dagger drawn. A dog and serpent drink from the wound. A scorpion clutches at the bull's genitals. Above, the sun and moon watch silently. The meaning we can only guess. Some say it symbolized cosmic renewal, the bull as life force, Mithras as the bringer of order. Others link it to Persian Zoroastrian roots, though the Roman Mithras were clearly his own figure. Still, others believe it represented a calendara celestial metaphor, but the truth remains just out of reach. The Mithraic faith died quietly by the 4th century as Christianity rose and Rome's priorities shifted. The temples were abandoned, some sealed, others repurposed. Their silence was complete. Today, you can still visit a few of these Mithraea in Rome, beneath the modern city, hidden below churches and apartment blocks. They sleep in stone. A faint trace of incense lingers. The benches are worn where countless followers once sat in ritual, but the stories, the voices, the rites, they are gone. What remains is the quiet, the stillness, the sensation of entering a room where something once mattered profoundly and now lies forgotten. And with that, we rise gently back to the surface, back to marble and light and dinner hour. But not just any dinner, a patrician's feast, a final look, not into shadows, but into luxury. Segment 4. Dinner with a patrician, luxury, decadence, and expectations. Let us now climb once more, away from the quiet temples, the dusty streets, the tasks of slaves, and the whispers of secret cults. We rise into the glow of oil lamps and flickering torches, through tall atriums lined with painted columns, past mosaic floors kissed by bare feet. It is the 8th hour of the Roman day. Time for the evening meal. You are no longer a slave, nor a soldier, nor an initiate. Tonight, you are a guest at a Roman patrician-esque convivium, the noble supper that is far more than mere nourishment. It is performance, it is status, it is rhythm and ritual, woven into the silk of daily elite life in ancient Rome. Let us walk slowly into this world of marble bowls, honeyed dormice, reclining couches, and heavy, unspoken rules. Imagine arriving just before sunset. The domus is large. You pass through the vestibule, where a slave greets you without smiling. The atrium opens before you, an open space with a small indoor pool, the impluvium catching the last drops of daylight. Painted walls depict scenes from Homer, gods with calm expressions. The floor beneath your feet clicks faintly tiny tesserae, forming intricate mosaics of fish, dolphins, or vine leaves. The host appears, robed, measured in speech. He welcomes you, not with hugs or shouts, but with gravity and subtle flattery. Tonight's company includes a senator, a poet, a wealthy freedman, and the son of a consul. The guest list, as always, is carefully chosen. You are led to the triclinium, the dining room with its signature 3 couches arranged in a U-shape. The table in the center is low, allowing for reclining. And now the meal begins. The Roman convivium unfolds in stages. First comes the gustaccio, the appetizer course. Perhaps eggs in pine nut sauce, oysters on a chilled silver plate, pickled vegetables in fine glass bowls from Alexandria. Then the prima mensa, the main course. Roasted game birds stuffed with herbs, fish with garum, that pungent, fermented sauce favored by all classes, lamb glazed in honey and vinegar, spiced with imported pepper from the east, and finally the secunda mensa dessert, fresh figs, candied dates, and small cakes made from cheese and flour. Perhaps a surprise, a single pomegranate split open to reveal the gleaming red seeds, a symbol of both wealth and subtle decadence. Slaves serve each course with practiced silence. They refill wine mixed with water, if they're pure. The strength and mixture vary by taste and social role. The host drinks moderately, the guests slightly more freely. But food is only part of the spectacle. The true purpose of the Roman dinner is display of knowledge, wit, and rank. As you recline on your elbow, your host may recite a passage from Virgil. Another guest counters with a fragment of Ennius, perfectly timed. A freedman tries to impress with a joke borderline inappropriate. The senator responds with a story from his time in Sicilia, laced with mild condescension. Politics are mentioned obliquely. Philosophy is dabbled in, especially Stoicism, which is fashionable this year. To eat without speaking well, to drink without poetic restraint, to lean too heavily into the cushions, or wipe your mouth with the wrong hand. These are social risks. The convivium is as much examination as entertainment. As the lamp's dim music begins, a small cithara is played by a slave girl, her eyes lowered. Another guest brings out a small scroll and reads a new epigram. The mood shifts from formal to almost theatrical. If the host is feeling bold, there may be dancing by others, never by guests, or a staged performance of mime, if wealth permits. Conversation turns toward the cosmos, or fate, or the ever-changing winds of imperial politics. And when the final wine is poured, the host calls for rose petals scattered across the floor by young slaves. The night ends not with farewells, but with a final toast to Fortuna, the goddess of luck. You rise slowly. The couch is soft, but the world is rigid. Tomorrow, your words may be remembered or forgotten, but your presence tonight has been seen. And so we leave Rome behind, not through the Palatine gates or across the Tiber, but by drifting backward, gently through all we've passed, from marble halls to hidden shrines, from scrolls and speeches to silent labor in the streets, from wealth to want and back again. The rhythm of Rome was not a single voice, but a murmur of many, a layered chorus of power and poverty, of gods and dust, of hunger and honeyed meat. And as the city sleeps, so may you let the torchlight of history dim, and rest now, gently, beneath the endless stars over ancient stones. A cold wind from the past, good evening or good night. Wherever you are, however your day has gone, welcome. You're here now, and that's enough. All you have to do is listen as we drift together into the distant past, into a world colder, rougher, and far less forgiving than the one you know. Tonight, we travel north, far north, to the ancient lands of Scandinavia, where the winters stretched endlessly, the stars burned low above snow-packed fjords, and the hearth was the beating heart of every home. You've heard stories of the Vikings before, warriors, raiders, conquerors of wind and sea. But tonight, we won't charge into battle. We'll walk slowly, softly, through the ordinary days of the people who lived behind the legends. We'll begin with the biting cold and what it truly meant to survive a Viking winter. Then we'll meet a man whose life was anything but ordinary. Harald Hardrada, the Viking who refused to die quietly. We'll explore the mysterious meanings carved into sacred stones. And finally, we'll settle into a warm, long hall where the rich dined, gossiped, and played their own quiet games of power. So, lie back, close your eyes if you'd like, and imagine yourself walking slowly through falling snow, breath clouding before you as we begin our journey into the past. Segment 1. Why you wouldn't last a day in a Viking winter. Imagine waking before the sun, not because you're eager to begin your day, but because the cold has crept through your thin wool blanket and found your bones. The longhouse is still dark, the fire in the hearth no more than a few sullen embers, glowing like tired eyes. The breath of your family rises in soft clouds. You rise, quietly, pulling on a coarse tunic, still stiff from yesterday's snow, but they're already chilled through. Outside, it's not quite morning. The sky is a heavy slate gray, and the snow has fallen again thick and silent in the night. The door creaks open. A low wind whistles through the crack, and just like that, the warmth you had disappears into the frost-bitten air. The water barrels froze. Every errand outdoors became a battle-hauling, ice-packed wood, scraping snow from roof beams, gathering what little remained of the fire-starting moss, now damp and uncooperative. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and sweat. The longhouse served many purposes: kitchen, bedroom, barn. The livestock slept inside 2 goats, sheep, even a cow, if you had one. Their body heat helped, so did the smell, though not in the way you'd like. Your clothing didn't help much. A heavy wool cloak, woven by hand, was laced at the neck, but after weeks of use, it itched constantly. Beneath it, layers of linen and wool, rough on the skin and never quite dry. The only socks you owned were made of felted wool, and the laces on your shoes were already fraying, and there was no real privacy. Everyone slept, ate, worked, and argued in the same narrow space. If someone snored, you heard it. If someone coughed, which happened, often you felt it, thick in the air. Disease lingered in winter like a persistent ghost. Food was another test. Winter meant preservation of meat, of root vegetables, of sanity. Dried fish was common, salted as heavily as possible. Flatbread made of barley or rye, kept in hard, disc-like rounds. Ale, sour, and often barely fermented, replaced water, which was difficult to store and easy to contaminate. It helped dull the taste of everything else. You spent much of your day keeping the fire alive. One person, usually younger or less skilled, would crouch beside it. The smoke rose directly into the room before drifting lazily through a hole in the roof. There was no chimney, only the low sting of smoke in your eyes and lungs. Still, there was rhythm, a kind of cold comfort in repetition. The clack of the loom, the scrape of a knife across leather, the mutter of old stories in the corner, told again and again in the same words, like spells to keep the dark at bay. And the dark, the sun barely rose in winter. In some places, it didn't rise at all for weeks, by the depth of the snow piled outside, by how often you had to rewrap your feet. Evenings were spent huddled close, the fire now blazing with fresh logs, precious, rationed fuel. You listened to elders recalling long voyages, to children whispering of gods and giants, to the slow breathing of those already asleep. Outside, the wind howled like an old beast. Inside, your world shrank to the glow of the fire. The Viking winter was not a time of adventure. It was survival, stripped to its quiet bones. But even in the cold, life carried on. As the snow fell and the stars turned slowly in the frost-bitten sky, so too did stories. A warrior, a wanderer, and in the end, a legend. Segment 2. Harald Hardrada, the Viking who couldn't die quietly. Let's step back further in time, from the huddled hearths of the common folk to the roaring saga of a man whose life was written not on parchment, but in sword strokes, sea spray, and royal blood. His name was Harald. They called him Hardrada, which meant the hard ruler, but few names captured so poorly the wild path he walked. Tonight, we tell his story not in glory and conquest, but slowly, gently, as one might whisper a tale over a winter fire. Harald Sigurdsson was born in the year 1015 in the icy cradle of Norway. He was a younger brother, not the heir, not the chosen one, but something burned in him, some ember of ambition, survival, and a quiet refusal to die in silence. When he was only 15, Harald's world shattered. His brother, Olaf, Haraldsson, known later as Saint Olaf, rose against Danish rule in Norway. Young Harald followed him into battle, too young for armor that fit, too proud to stay behind. They marched with barely trained men and thin provisions, and at the Battle of Stiklestad they met their doom. Olaf was killed, his army scattered, but Harald survived. He fled east beyond forests, beyond rivers, beyond all he had known, into the strange, cold order of Kievan Rus, where Norse blood flowed in Slavic veins. There, under the rule of Prince Yaroslav the Wise, Harald waited. He grew, he trained, he watched, but that was not the end. Because Harald did something few others dared. He went south, to Byzantium, to Constantinople, to the shining empire of gold domes and marble courts, where Norse warriors called the Varangian Guard served the emperor as elite soldiers. Harald became one of them. It was there that his legend grew, not in a single battle, not in a blaze of glory, but over years of quiet brutality, secret campaigns, and battles forgotten by history. He fought across Sicily, Bulgaria, even Jerusalem. He gathered plundering up to shame kings, and somewhere along the way he began to think like one. When he finally returned to Norway, more than a decade had passed. He was no longer the brother of a fallen king. He was a hardened mercenary, a man of scars and strategy. He wanted a crown. Norway was ruled by another No Magnus, the good, but Harald, ever patient, bought support with silver. He made alliances. He waited again. Eventually, the throne came to him, not in a grand battle, but through a deal. He would share power and then claim it fully, as King Harold was not beloved. He was strict, tax-heavy, distant, but he brought order, ships, law, and fear. Still, something stirred in him. Perhaps he felt time slipping through his fingers, or perhaps, as with many warriors, peace simply bored him. In 1066, at the age of 51, Harold made one final fateful gamble. He set sail for England. He believed, rightly or wrongly, that he had a claim to the English throne. The realm was in turmoil, competing kings, betrayals, promises made and broken. Harold arrived with a fleet and fire in his veins. At first, he won. He crushed resistance at Fulford near York. The English, caught off guard, fled before him. But fate was patient. 3 days later, at Stamford Bridge, the English King Harold Godwinson arrived with a rapid force. Harold, unprepared, had left much of his armor behind. The sun was bright, the weather warm. He charged anyway. It was his last battle. An arrow struck him in the throat. A simple, ordinary end for a man whose life had been anything but. Harold Hardrada's death marked the end of the Viking Age. No more great sea kings would follow. No more Norse invasions of England would succeed. It was the last breath of a world built on long ships, blood oaths, and hard winters. But in the stillness of that story, isn't it strange how a man who lived so loudly faded into quiet? He died not with trumpets, but with a soft whisper of wind over a battlefield, as if the world simply moved on. And so we leave Harold behind and turn now to something even older, even harder to grasp. Not a man, not a king, but a carved stone. Let's drift deeper still, into riddles etched in rock and the echoes of a forgotten tongue. Segment 3, Runestones, Riddles, and the Mystery of Norse Mythology. Let's leave the clamor of kings and the weight of winter behind and step quietly into the stillness of stone. Because all across the lands once walked by the Norse, from the frost-bitten hills of Sweden to the silent woods of Denmark, stand markers, stones etched with runes, whispers from the past, fixed in granite. These are the runestones. Some are tall and proud, standing like sentinels in open fields. Others hide near old churches, half swallowed by grass and time. But all of them speak. If you know how to listen, tonight we listen. Runstones were not gravestones. Though some marked death, they were not maps. Though some showed names of places, people, and deeds, they were something stranger, something softer. Monuments of memory in a world where memory often disappeared. The runes carved into them were from the younger Futhark, a writing system of just 16 characters, fewer than our alphabet, yet used to speak of loss, love, journeys, vengeance, and gods. A typical inscription might say, Gunnulf raised this stone in memory of Torsten, his brother. He died in the east with honor. Simple, sparse, but full of grief. A man vanished far from home, a stone left to hold his name. Some stones show dragons, twisting along the edges, biting their own tails. Others are wrapped in serpents, believed to bind magic. And sometimes, just sometimes, the stones speak directly. I hid this runic spell. May he who breaks it rot in fire. Or, this stone is cursed. May wolves devour he who defaces it. Curses in stone. Warnings to the living. Proof that belief, deep, mystical, and raw-shaped the Norse soul. And what of their gods? Not gentle, not perfect, but strange, powerful, and eerily human. Odin, the one-eyed wanderer, traded an eye for wisdom. He hung himself from a tree for 9 nights to gain the secret of the runes. He was not just a god of war, but of poetry, death, and riddles. Thor, strong-armed and red-bearded, defended humans against giants, wielding his hammer, Mjolnir, which always returned when thrown. He roared, he fought, he loved his goats and hated tricky words. And then there was Loki, neither friend nor foe, a shapeshifter, a joke with sharp edges, a god who birthed monsters and whispered chaos into calm places. These stories weren't written down until long after the Viking Age ended. They were sung, told, whittled into minds by long winter nights. Even now, we don't fully understand them. Were the gods metaphors? Were they myths made from meteor storms, polar lights, or the crash of waves? Were they ancestors' warnings, comfort? No one knows for sure. But on the Rack stone in Sweden, one of the longest runic inscriptions, we find something unusual. Verses fragments, a riddle. It speaks of Theodoric, a king of old, of twilight, and battles never seen, and 9 generations. It mixes history and myth until the two are impossible to tell apart. A scholar once described reading it as walking into a fog made of symbols. And maybe that's the point. Runestones aren't history in the way we like it today. There are no full dates, no exact maps, just names, emotions, symbols, like embers left behind. But those stones still stand, cold to the touch, worn by rain, waiting in their silence. They ask us not to solve them, but to remember that something was once here, someone lived, someone carved, and now, so long after their voices faded, we listen. Let us drift now, finally, to the other side of the Norse world. Not the toil, not the wanderers, not the riddles, but the warmth of wealth, the strange peace of status. Come with me to the long hall of the Viking elite. 2 soft cloaks, slow meals, and the weight of watching eyes. Segment 4. Feasting in the long hall. What rich Vikings really ate and wore. You've weathered the cold, followed the warriors, and traced your fingers across the edges of ancient stone. Now, at last, you're invited indoors, not to the crowded longhouse of smoke and sweat, but to a different place, quieter, warmer, richer. Welcome to the long hall of the elite. It's twilight outside, but in here the firelight flickers like gold. The walls are timbered, tall, and curved like the ribs of a ship. Furs soften the benches. Shields hang as decoration. The smell of roast meat, burning pine, and strong mead fills the air. This is not a place of war. This is a place of status. You might think the Viking elite dressed in furs and horned helmets, but forget the horns. They're a myth, and the truth is far stranger and softer. Their clothing was intricate. Men wore fine wool tunics, dyed deep blues and reds colors, expensive to produce. Women wrapped themselves in layered linen and silk, clasped with brooches of silver or even imported gold. Their jewelry was weighty, rings of twisted bronze, pendants carved with tiny hammer shapes or animal heads. Shoes were leather, supple and lined. Hair was oiled, beards combed. There was pride in appearances, especially at feasts. The meal was a performance. It began with hand-washing a basin, brought to each guest, usually poured over fragrant herbs. Clean hands, clean hearts, they might say, though behind the rituals were quiet competitions who brought the most expensive soap, whose servant knelt lowest. Then came the food. A great wooden platter might hold roast pork, dripping fat and spiced with mustard seed or juniper. Boiled fish, caught fresh, and served with barley and vinegar. Cheeses, sharp or soft, stored in waxed jars. Berries, dried or stewed with honey. And always bread, round, flat, and dense, eaten with butter or dipped in broth to drink. Mead fermented honey and water, or ale, dark and grainy. If you were truly wealthy, wine, imported in clay jars from Francia or farther still. Sipped slowly, watched closely, but more than food was talk. The long hall was a stage for boasts and stories, where skalds, the Norse poets, chanted aloud in verse, retelling battles or praising lords. Their words came in waves, softly rising, then falling again like breath in the dark. Politics happened here, too. Deals, alliances, promises wrapped in riddles. And somewhere in the corner, a quiet guest, a rival maybe, someone who watched more than spoke. At the head of the hall sat the chieftain, not just a warrior, but a keeper of gift-giving. He handed out rings, swords, silver cups, but not for free. Every gift was a bond, a reminder. You eat well because you serve well. You wear silk because you've bled for me. This was not idle luxury. It was a system. Even the softest beds were bought with loyalty. Even the smoothest mead came with memory. And when the flames burned low, and the songs faded into soft drumbeats, guests retired to bedrolls, layered in furs. Above them, the rafters whispered, and outside, the wind began to rise again. But here, in the long hall, there was warmth, the warmth of wealth, the hush of heavy cloaks, the quiet luxury of being safe for one more night. And now, our journey ends. You've crossed the snow-covered farms of the Viking world, sailed through sagas and battlefields, stood before stone riddles, and tasted the honeyed quiet of the Norse elite. Let it all melt now, like ice touched by morning light. Breathe deep. Let the fire crackle on in your mind, even as your thoughts begin to blur and drift. History may be cold and hard sometimes, but tonight, it's just soft enough to sleep in. Good night. What it was really like to be a Civil War telegraph operator. The room is small, just for wooden walls, a single window, and a desk made from mismatched planks. It is neither battlefield nor home, but something in between, a space set aside for listening. Imagine yourself seated in a worn wooden chair. A wool coat hangs from a peg nearby, stiff from cold. Outside, the war murmurs distant musket fire, the faint rumble of cannons rolling across low hills. But here, in this little room, there is only quiet, and then a click, then another. The telegraph sounder begins to speak. You are a telegraph operator. Your world is not shaped by swords or sabers, but by metal keys, ink, and rhythm. Each message arrives in patterns, dots, dashes, pauses. You recognize them like a musician knows notes, intuitively, steadily, without needing to think. You write with a pencil worn thin at one end. The words come quickly: military positions, orders, requests for supplies. Sometimes the messages are short and plain. Other times they are encrypted, encoded with ciphers. Only you and your commanding officer understand. You don't ask questions. You simply transcribe, line after line. The building you sit in, perhaps a field shack, or the back room of a rail station, offers little comfort. The floorboards creak beneath your boots. A small stove glows faintly in the corner, never quite warming the room. The smell is familiar, a mix of burning coal, damp paper, and the faint temps of oil from the telegraph coils. You sip coffee that's gone lukewarm, the taste more ash than bean. Outside, soldiers move in the distance. You hear their voices now and then, quick, clipped orders or laughter between shifts. But no one enters this room unless something is urgent. Most of the time, you are alone. You've been here for hours. You rarely count them anymore. Sometimes you stay awake for a day and a half straight, waiting for word from the front. You listen for patterns, write replies, reroute urgent dispatches through tangled lines stretched across ravines and rivers. Sometimes the wires hum faintly. Sometimes they are dead. You wait either way, and the danger, it doesn't come with noise. A misplaced message, a wrong letter, and men could march into ambush. Supply wagons could go missing. An entire offensive could collapse. You carry none of this in your hands. No sword, no musket, but every key you tap echoes into the battlefield beyond, and you know it. Occasionally, the line cuts out entirely. Sabotage, lightning, wind-torn poles. When that happens, you shoulder a spool of wire, grab your kit, and walk the length of the break, sometimes alone, sometimes with a soldier escort, always carefully. You step through muddy fields, across frozen bridges, beneath trees that sway above like dark figures. You repair the wire with trembling hands, cold enough that the metal burns against your fingers. Then you return, sit back down, and resume listening. Meals are irregular. You eat what's brought hardtack and salt pork, or a wedge of bread wrapped in cloth. It doesn't matter. Your mind is always half listening, ears attuned to every tap, every hesitation in the wire. Sometimes you receive news before anyone else. A victory, a retreat, a death. You write it down and wait until someone comes to collect the message. You never deliver it yourself. You simply watch them read the words. Sometimes their shoulders drop. Sometimes they say nothing at all. You learn not to ask. At night, the room changes. The lamplight pools on the table, warm and golden. The ticking of the clock slows. Or perhaps it's just you growing drowsy. Messages still arrive. You transcribe them slower now, but no less carefully. The pen glides over the page. Your breath fogs faintly in the cold air. Outside, the night grows quiet. Only the wind stirs the grass. But you remain, waiting, tapping, listening. You are a telegraph operator, not a soldier, not a general. But your work moves armies. Your name may not be remembered, but every dot and dash you sent shaped something far larger. And in the flickering light, with the wires humming gently across the landscape, you sit still, steady, and entirely essential. Segment 2. Clara Barton, the angel of the battlefield. The battlefield is quiet now. The cannons have fallen still. Smoke still clings low to the earth like a shroud, and beneath it there are voices, soft, desperate, broken, calling out names, calling for water, or calling for nothing at all. You are walking across this silence, not with boots heavy from combat, but with skirts dampened by dew and blood. Your hands hold not a weapon, but a lantern and a satchel full of bandages. Your name is Clara Barton. Clara wasn't born for war. She was born in Massachusetts in 1821, into a world of calm towns and strict rules, a teacher by trade. A woman expected to be quiet, contained, and domestic. But Clara never quite fit into that shape. Even as a girl, She worked tirelessly teaching at schools no one else would, caring for her sick brother with obsessive devotion, organizing when others hesitated. She didn't make speeches. She didn't demand rights. She simply acted. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, she was 39 years old, well past the age where most expected her to change the course of her life. But change it she did. She began by collecting supplies, bandages, blankets, medicine from her friends and neighbors in Washington, D.C. Then she did something bolder. She brought them to the front lines herself. At first, the army resisted her presence. Women weren't meant to be near battlefields, but Clara had a quiet kind of persistence. She showed up anyway. At Antietam, one of the bloodiest single-day battles in American history, she was there, not hiding, not waiting, but moving calmly, steadily among the wounded. Soldiers would later remember her presence, not with fanfare, but with a single word: peaceful. One man said he felt no pain at all when she knelt beside him, only warmth. Another swore he saw her lantern before he saw the stars. She had no formal medical training, no uniform, no rank, just an endless supply of bandages, and a gaze that made chaos seem to slow down. She worked in field hospitals and barns, in open meadows and church basements. She sewed wounds, spoon-fed broth, and read letters aloud to the dying. She did it all without complaint. Clara never married. She never had children of her own. But by war's end, she had held the hands of thousands of sons and buried more than she could ever name. After the war, she didn't rest. She launched a massive effort to identify missing soldiers. She answered over 63,000 letters from grieving families. She compiled names, dug through records, cross-referenced diaries and ledgers, all by hand, all with the same quiet determination. And then she looked outward, beyond the war, beyond the States. She traveled to Europe, where she encountered a strange, remarkable organization, the International Red Cross. She studied its principles, watched how it moved swiftly in times of disaster, regardless of borders, and when she returned home, she planted the seeds of it in American soil. In 1881, at the age of 60, Clara Barton founded the American Red Cross. She would lead it for 23 years, not from an office, but from riverbanks and hurricane shelters, from flood zones and war fronts. She wore a long black dress, a lace collar, a pin with the Red Cross insignia that gleamed softly in the light. And though she became a legend, called the Angel of the Battlefield, she never sought fame. Her legacy isn't one of speeches, it's one of presence, of being there again and again when no one else was. If you were to pass Clara in a crowd, you might not notice her. She walked with humility, spoke gently, moved slowly, but beneath all that stillness was a core of iron. She was not fearless. She was simply more useful than fear. Now, as we leave her behind, still moving through the rows of cots, still brushing hair from damp foreheads, we turn to something even quieter, a message left behind, a code never cracked, and a question. What secrets did the Civil War carry in its silences? Let's follow the sound of mystery into the strange, hushed world of the cipher that wasn't broken. Segment 3. The cipher that wasn't broken. There are many kinds of silence in history. The silence of loss, the silence after gunfire, the silence of letters that never arrived. But tonight, we lean into a different kind, the silence of a code, one that was written, transmitted, and never fully deciphered. This is the story of a message sent during the Civil War, one that speaks in riddles, and rests in shadows. The telegraph, with all its wires and spark, brought incredible speed to the 1860s, but speed invites danger. A message could travel miles in moments, but who else might be listening? Both Union and Confederate forces quickly understood. Secrecy mattered. To protect messages, the military began using ciphers, replacing letters with symbols, shuffling word orders, or encoding dispatches through preset keys only a few men knew. Some of these codes were simple, some were brilliant, and at least one has never been solved. It was found long after the war ended, tucked inside the leather lining of a trunk, among brittle maps, faded ledgers, and scraps of yellowed paper. Its ink had faded, its corners curled, but the writing was clear, a page filled with seemingly nonsensical letters and symbols, arranged in orderly blocks. It read like this: PXURYL JGDZ PODNCBOA JWQV. It looked like gibberish, but there was something about it, something deliberate. It had the structure of communication, the rhythm of thought. Historians were intrigued. They ran tests, tried substitutions, cross-referenced other known Civil War ciphers. Nothing worked. Theories bloomed like soft moss in forgotten places. Some believed it was a personal cipher created by a single officer and known only to him and his aide. Others thought it was a decoy, never meant to be read, a ghost message. Still others suggested it held sensitive movements of troops, meant to be destroyed after use, but somehow preserved by accident. There was even a rumor never proven that the message referenced a secret escape route used in the final days of the Confederacy, a path through marsh and pine, never mapped, never followed, but perhaps that's just speculation. The cipher remains. People have tried to solve it using modern tools, computers, frequency analysis, even AI models trained on Civil War syntax. Still, the message holds tight. It's quiet, patient, unyielding, not unlike the men who might have written it, hunched in the back of a wagon, or seated in a smoke-filled tent, carefully encoding their thoughts as distant drums echoed through the trees. Ciphers during the war were not rare. The Union Army used the cipher, a polyalphabetic method, relying on a keyword. The Confederates favored root transposition ciphers, where words were rearranged based on a grid pattern. One famous code involved writing the message down a column and reading it across, so that attack at dawn might become something like Adnica. Confusing, but effective. If intercepted, a message could be worthless without the key. And so they guarded those keys carefully, in breast pockets, sewn into hat linings, or memorized and burned. But the message in the trunk, it has no key, no author, no destination. It just remains. A whisper from a vanished war, a riddle left behind, perhaps never meant to be answered, only remembered. And maybe that's the beauty of it. Some parts of the past do not demand solving. They ask only to be noticed, held softly in the hand like a stone pulled from a stream, cool, weighty, and quiet. Let us set the cipher down now, carefully, gently, and step into our final scene, not into code, but into comfort, or something that looked like it. A room with polished floors, a soft couch, a piano that hasn't been played in days. Come with me now to a parlor, a plantation parlor, where the war was always far away, and yet always just outside the window. Segment 4. A plantation parlor during wartime. The war is still out there, like a low storm, far beyond the trees. But here, In this house, there is only stillness. Welcome to the plantation parlor, a room of hush and habit, filtered light through lace curtains, and the quiet tick of a pendulum clock. The air carries faint sweetness, orange blossom, beeswax, and polished wood. It is 1864, the American South. The war is nearing its end, but in this parlor, peace pretends to linger. You are barefoot on faded rugs. Sunlight has drained their color, leaving patches of pale red and gray. The lady of the house is sewing. Her hand moves from memory, a rhythm carved by years, not thought. Her daughter sits at the piano. She touches the keys gently, but never plays a song. A servant enters with tea, eyes low, steps careful, no words spoken. The silence isn't empty. It is full of memory, of restraint, of waiting. This room is a kind of theater, a place where war is not acknowledged, though its shadow is stitched into every scene. There are fewer visitors now. The tea is bitter, the sugar coarse. The crystal glasses have small chips. The chairs, once imported, now show threads at the corners. One has a tear. No one speaks of it. Letters arrive slowly, some not at all. They are opened with care, read in silence. The men are gone. The fields are quieter. The enslaved walk them still, but with different eyes. They dust the parlor, serve tea, hear everything, say nothing, but they notice a missing name at breakfast, a silver box packed away, the drawn look of the mistress. They wait, not for permission, but for the end. Still, the performance continues. A quiet wedding, a gown restitched, a piano slightly out of tune, and yet she plays 3 notes, then stillness. Privilege does not vanish. It bends, quietly, without announcement. Some parlors became sick rooms, some burned, some waited in silence, and were simply forgotten. But for a time, they held the illusion of control, of grace, of distance. Let that room fade now. Let the porcelain cool. Let the light slip down the walls. We've seen enough for one night, heard enough, imagined enough. You don't need to carry it with you. The past will wait. It always does. And for now, you can rest. Tonight, we'll wander through the muffled echoes of a war, not told with cannon blasts or cavalry charges, but with soot-streaked hands, kneaded dough, and the lingering scent of rising bread. This is not a tale of battle, not really. This is the story of those who labored in the cold shadows behind the front lines, of a baker with chapped fingers and a spine bent by sacks of flour, trudging through frostbitten mornings to feed an empire. It's a story of small comforts, of bread as lifeline, bread as morale, bread as strategy. And as we drift through this quieter corner of the Napoleonic world, we'll also explore the lonely days of an emperor in exile, the strange archaeological remains of a forgotten army meal, and the contrasting luxury of Parisian banquets attended by those far from the smoke of war. So, find a comfortable place, allow your breath to slow. Let your thoughts settle like flour to the bottom of a mixing bowl. We begin, as many soldiers' days once did, with the weary work of bread making. Segment 1, Why It Sucked to be a Napoleonic Army Baker. Ambient wind, crackling coals, and the dull thud of kneading dough can gently underscore this segment. Imagine yourself waking not to the crow of a rooster, but to the silence of pre-dawn cold, your limbs stiff with sleep, your breath rising in soft clouds. It is somewhere in Saxony, or perhaps northern Italy. The location hardly matters anymore. The road behind is endless, and the one ahead is no less so. You are a baker for the Grande. You do not wear a polished saber, nor do you ride a fine horse. Your tools are humbler: an iron scoop, a wooden trough, and 2 hands that haven't stopped aching in weeks. Before the sun touches the horizon, your day has already begun. You fumble in the dark for your rough-spun overcoat, caked with flour, and step into the chill. Others sleep still, huddled in makeshift tents or curled near the embers of last night's fire. But the dough must be started. A battle of provisions. Feeding Napoleon's vast army, numbering in the hundreds of thousands at its peak, was a logistical miracle attempted daily. Each regiment included assigned bakers, typically drawn from the ranks of conscripted artisans. These were not volunteers. The ration goal was simple: a loaf per man per day. But the reality was anything but. Flour had to be scavenged, bought, stolen, or requisitioned from local villages. When they could not find wheat, they ground acorns. When the carts broke down, the flour had to be carried on your back through mud. Wood for the ovens was always in short supply. Many times, ovens had to be built from scratch, temporary field ovens fashioned from clay and stone. Imagine crouching beside one, wind whipping through your threadbare scarf, smoke stinging your eyes as you fan embers to life in the icy dark. The physical toll. There were no mixers, no luxuries. The dough was made by hand, in troughs often shared between dozens of men. Cold made the yeast sluggish. Heat turned the dough sour. You kneaded with numb fingers until they cracked, and then you kept kneading. Sometimes the loaves turned out undercooked, heavy with unbaked centers. No one cared. Hunger forgives texture. A soldier would take that brick of bread and press it against his breast to warm it, as if absorbing calories by osmosis. You might think the baking would bring comfort. The scent of fresh bread, after all, is said to soothe the soul. But here, it only reminded the men how hungry they were. And after baking, your work was not done. Marching bakers. Once the bread cooled, you marched. Not every day, but often. Your back loaded with whatever loaves remained. You joined the column. Muskets, drums, horses, and men. And you, trudging behind them all, soot still clinging to your cheeks. At rest stops, soldiers swarmed you like flies, hands outstretched. Many times there was not enough to go around. They cursed you, called you names. Sometimes they wept. You did not sleep well. Even when there was time, you dreamed of ovens that cracked in the frost. You dreamed of flour sacks, each lighter than the last. You dreamed of silence, the smell of war. There's something haunting in the thought of it. Not the roar of battle, but the smell of rising bread drifting across a field of tents. Of men sharing crusts, not stories. Of warmth that lingers only a moment in their hands. You, the baker, were not remembered in glory. Your name does not appear in dispatches or memoirs, but your loaves may have saved more lives than any saber. And in the end, when flour ran out and the fires went cold, the army faltered not from lack of courage, but from empty stomachs. As you picture those early mornings, the heavy dough, and the march beyond the firelight, let your breath ease once more. The cold has passed now. The oven has dimmed. The loaves are gone. And as we continue this journey, we step away from the flour and the frost, and toward a distant island. There, on the rocky shore of Elba, a deposed emperor waits, writing letters, pacing rooms, dreaming of bread, perhaps. Segment 2. The exile of Napoleon on Elba. The war was not over, not truly, but for a brief moment in 1814 it paused, and in that pause the man who had once ruled most of Europe found himself not in a palace, but on a rocky island adrift in the Tyrrhenian Sea, barely visible on most maps. This was Elba, and here Napoleon Bonaparte, once the master of armies, would become the prisoner of silence. An emperor in a villa, the Villa dei Milani, perched on the hillside above Portoferraio, became Napoleon's modest seat. Not a palace, not really. A whitewashed residence with a library, a garden, and a view of the sea. The ceilings were low, the furniture sparse. He awoke early. Old habits die slowly. He dressed in uniform not to command, but because identity is fragile in exile. He walked the grounds, hands clasped behind his back, his thoughts hidden behind that impassive mask history knows so well. You can almost see him, pacing the garden paths, boots brushing against wind-dried rosemary, eyes cast toward the sea. The quiet here was not peaceful, it was deafening. Routine without purpose, Napoleon's days became a strange parody of power. He retained the title of emperor, and Elba was technically his domain, a miniature kingdom of hills, vineyards, and fishing villages. He reformed the island's administration, reorganized the legal code, visited schools, built roads. He even inspected mines and suggested improvements. But no one truly listened, not in the way they once had. The crowds were small, the applause scattered, the sense of command had faded. Each morning brought routine, a ride through the hills, a report from his tiny garrison, a quiet meal, usually of fish and vegetables, and then writing, always writing. A quill replaces the sword. He wrote letters to Josephine, though she would never see him again. He wrote to diplomats, to generals, to his mother in Corsica. He scribbled military theories, reflections on history, and perhaps most revealing meticulous plans for an escape he did not yet know he would make. He had books brought to him, classical histories, treatises on government, philosophy. The works of Plutarch and Tacitus sat beside military maps and engineering manuals. Imagine him by candlelight, the flame flickering softly across a worn desk, his pen scratching steadily. He does not speak. The room smells of ink and salt air. Outside, the wind stirs the olive trees. A different kind of war. Napoleon was a man of momentum. Elba, in contrast, stood still. He created a small court, appointed officials, even established a personal guard who wore bright uniforms and drilled each morning for no one's benefit but his own. Meals were taken at precise hours. Conversations were careful. Occasionally, a visiting ship brought gossip from the mainland, a change of government, a shift in alliances, the boredom of the Paris elite, and all the while the emperor waited, not idly, but like a coiled spring, hidden beneath layers of etiquette and routine. The rhythms of Elba were not those of a man defeated. They were the slow, calculated breaths of a man gathering strength. The view from the balcony at dusk. He often stood on the villa's balcony. Below him, the sea shimmered with the last light of day. He could see Corsica on clear evenings, and beyond that, the shadowy promise of France. The scent of lemon trees mixed with the distant smoke of cooking fires. The island was quiet, too quiet. He was 30 miles long from shore to shore, surrounded by blue. But in his mind, the maps of Europe never faded. He knew that across the water, France was restless. Louis XVIII returned to power, had few admirers. The people missed their emperor, or at least the version of him they had imagined. He would return, but not yet. A moment suspended. This interlude, Elba, was not a fall, nor a triumph. It was a breath held in the throat of history, a time when the world forgot Napoleon, a time when he remembered himself. And as we leave the island behind, the waves still lapping at its shore, we follow a subtler thread. Not ambition, not politics, but something simpler. A soup pot left behind on the path of retreat, heavy with soot and memory. Segment 3. The mystery of the abandoned cauldron in Smolensk. Low wind through tall grass, crackle of ice beneath the earth. The sense of something lost and almost remembered along the road to Moscow, and even more so along the road back. The Grande left behind more than footprints. They left ruts where carts had broken. They left bones where men had fallen. And now and then, strangest of all, they left cooking pots, iron cauldrons, some rusted, some scorched, some resting oddly upright, as if waiting to be filled again. And in one field, outside the battered town of Smolensk, one such pot was found, still blackened with use, still heavy with time. What was cooked here? Who stirred it last? Why was it left behind? A road of desperation. It was late 1812. Napoleon's men had marched into Russia with 600,000 souls. By the time they reached Smolensk on the return, that number had become a grim whisper. Perhaps 40,000 remained. Some historians say even fewer. The ground was iron-hard with early frost. The air was thin with smoke and the stench of collapse. Horses died. Men stumbled. The pace of retreat was no longer steady, was fractured, desperate, haunted. And amid this desolation, the army's kitchens, the mobile heart of nourishment, fell apart. Wagons were abandoned. Oxen fled or were eaten. Fires became hard to light. Rations became invisible. Still, some tried to cook, to gather something warm before sleep. And so the soup pot, what they ate when there was nothing left, the cauldron in Smolensk, was found near a makeshift bivouac site, not far from a frost-bitten grove. There were remnants of charred roots, some burnt onion skins, the faint residue of dried horse meat, thin, salty, bitter. Historians believe it was part of a field kitchen assigned to a retreating Polish brigade under French command. Imagine them cold beyond words, shivering in stolen cloaks, scraping together something from scavenged herbs and a handful of black bread boiled until soft. They poured snow into the pot for water. They used rifle butts to stir. One soldier likely tasted the broth, decided it was too thin, and added pieces of leather straps sliced from their own boots. A common practice. The leather was boiled, softened, then chewed. It did not nourish, but it gave the illusion of food. And sometimes illusion is enough to survive the next hour. Why leave it behind? The pot was heavy, nearly 60 pounds, meant to be slung under a cart or hauled by mule. But the mules were gone, the carts shattered. And so, when the order came to move, perhaps with Cossacks not far behind, they made the choice. The fire was kicked out, the pot left behind, and the men walked on, their backs to the warmth that might have been. A story in iron and ash, this particular cauldron, decades later, became a curiosity for local villagers. They used it during spring feasts, until it finally cracked from age and was left to rust in a barn. Only in the early 20th century did scholars begin to take note. The shape was standard French military design. The iron bore a faint maker's mark, Fontainebleau, 1809. That tiny stamp was its passport. It had traveled across rivers and nations, through snow and thunder, to end here empty. Food as history's shadow, there is a strange poetry in this, that the forgotten object is not a musket or medal, but a cooking pot, because in that pot was more than soup. There was the final breath of camaraderie, the last shared warmth before sleep, the illusion of normalcy on a night when the world collapsed. And as the army dissolved into frost and fog, that pot remained, still, waiting, witness. What endures, and what does not? The men who stirred it are long gone, their names lost to mud and ice, but their hunger is remembered, not in books, but in iron. We cannot taste their meals, but we can feel their absence. We cannot warm our hands at their fire, but we know what it meant to them. And so we leave Smolensk and its quiet fields, and drift toward a very different table, a place where porcelain gleamed and chandeliers danced with candlelight, where the wine never froze and bread was cut with silver knives. Paris. While soldiers starved, others feasted. Segment 4. Banquets in Paris. Dining in style during the war's soft background. Clinking glasses, distant piano, muted laughter, fire crackling in a stone hearth. We drift now into another world entirely. While bakers marched and cauldrons boiled with despair far across Europe, the salons of Paris sparkled. The war felt distant, here not, absent, just, curated, managed like a difficult conversation that must be politely endured. Outside, posters updated the latest victories or defeats. Inside, chandeliers glittered above the heads of men and women whose greatest hardship, on most nights, was choosing between sauces. This was Paris during the Napoleonic Wars, not a city without sorrow, but one with good curtains. And behind those curtains, the banquets never truly stopped. The Parisian rhythm of war each day, the city's streets filled with the sound of life continuing. Bakers rose early, yes, but their ovens were full. Markets thrived, theaters hummed. New fashions were stitched and displayed. And in the evenings, the nobility, the wealthy bourgeoisie, foreign dignitaries, and senior officers dined. The invitation might be verbal or written on thick cardstock. It would arrive in the early afternoon, often scented with lavender or bergamot, and outlined the hour of arrival and the formality of the dress. A dinner for 12. Or perhaps 40, sometimes 100. By twilight, candles were lit, footmen waited, and the tables, a table of contrasts. Imagine yourself stepping into such a room. The wallpaper is damask, deep crimson or soft gold. The floor glows with waxed polish. Music hums somewhere just out of view. The table stretches nearly the length of the room. Dozens of dishes are already in place, kept warm by silver lids and the glow of servers' attention. Glazed quails, PTN, crow, TE, oysters from the coast of Brittany, resting on beds of salt, venison with black currant reduction, turned vegetables carved into shapes, roses, stars, tiny ships, and bread always bread, fluffy, white, perfectly domed, never burned, never scarce. Napoleon himself, when present in Paris, famously ate quickly and without ceremony, but his generals and the court officials feasted with dedication. The theater of the banquet dining was not only nourishment, it was display, a language of class, taste, power. Courses were served in service a la Francaise, a style that presented multiple dishes at once, encouraging visual grandeur. Platters arrived, simultaneously foul beside fish, sweet beside savory. You chose your portion, or declined, with the graceful wave of a fan. The hosts were measured in their hosting. The conversation floated above politics, though war lingered beneath the surface like a bitter herb. Guests toasted victories they barely understood. They wore medals earned by others, and they laughed softly, carefully about the misfortunes of enemy nations. Outside, the war was cold, muddy, unkind. But in here, dessert was served on porcelain imported from Limoges, who dined while others starved. There is no villain in this room, not precisely. Many guests had lost loved ones to war. Many gave to charities, sent money to the front, or took in wounded officers. Their hands were soft, but not entirely unfeeling, and yet the distance was real. While men froze outside Moscow, Paris enjoyed a mild winter. While cauldrons in Smolensk boiled shoe leather, Paris dined on truffles and turtle soup. While bakers marched through mud, these halls rang with laughter. It is not cruelty, perhaps. It is disconnection, and that, too, is part of history. The subtle threads that tie it all together. What is bread, if not memory? In Paris, it was served sliced into perfect rounds. In the field, it was broken, hoarded, fought over. In exile, Napoleon may have tasted simpler low-stick crusts, coarse grain, the kind made by hand, not by servants. Perhaps he remembered the flavor of army bread more clearly than he remembered courtly Peter. And when he returned, briefly, brilliantly, before Waterloo it said, he demanded field kitchens again, wanting the army fed before the fight, because morale, after all, begins in the stomach. An evening draws to a close, as dessert is served, orange-flavored custards, candied almonds, fine cheeses. The hour grows late, candelabras burn lower, conversation softens. Guests drift from dining room to salon, or from salon to carriage, and the war continues. It always does. Hello there. Welcome to Boring History for Sleep. You've come to the right place to drift into the soft stillness of the past. Here, we don't rush. We wander through history with a quiet mind and an easy pace. Tonight, we submerge, deep beneath the surface of the ocean, far from sunlight, gliding through the cold blackness during the tense decades of the Cold War. But we will not stay there. We will visit a spy who walked calmly toward his fate, step into the murky truth behind a sleep experiment that never quite was, and then rise slowly. Imagine yourself stepping aboard a submarine somewhere in the late 1960s. The moment you cross the threshold, the outside world falls away. There is no fresh air here, no sunlight, no wind. It is not unpleasant, exactly, just ... ever present, a part of life now. Everything here is narrow. The corridors are just wide enough for one person to walk through at a time. Every inch is used. Bunks are stacked 3 high, barely wide enough to turn over in personal belongings, fit into metal boxes the size of bread loaves. Some men hot bunks, sharing the same bed in shifts. When one is working, the other is sleeping. Time becomes abstract. Instead, red lights mark night, and white lights mark day. The ship follows its own rhythm watch rotations, meal times, silent drills. The world above the waves could be burning or blooming, and the crew would not know. Meals are routine, predictable, rehydrated eggs, tinned meats, powdered drinks, a small kindness in an artificial world. On Soviet boats, food is sparser, black bread, canned stews, strong tea. But always, the cooks are vital. A good cook means morale. A bad one, days stretch longer. The silence is never complete. There is the ever-present sound of machines, the hum of the reactor, the soft whir of gyroscopes. Even in sleep, these sounds become part of the subconscious, a lullaby of engineering. The men are quiet, mostly. Voices are low, jokes whispered. Everyone knows that a submarine must listen as much as it moves. Noise discipline is drilled in, a dropped wrench, a shouted word. These are not just annoyances, they are risks. A breach, and everything would vanish in seconds. But danger is abstract, distant. More often, it is the routine that becomes the challenge. Monotony, the same faces, the same rooms, the same artificial air. Letters come late, if at all. Someone may have had a baby. Someone else may have passed away. But here, life moves differently. There is no past, no future, only the next shift. Still, there is camaraderie, shared jokes, a chessboard with an unfinished game, a pin-up photo taped carefully inside a locker. Little rituals to preserve a sense of normalcy. You learn to speak in whispers. You learn to wait. Sometimes the submarine will rise just enough for the periscope to breach the waterline. And if the timing is right, and if you're lucky, you might catch a glimpse of the moon, that the surface is still there, that someday the hatch will open again. And when it does, the first breath of real, unfiltered air stings like cold fire. The sun feels too bright, the wind too loud, but you adjust, and then you return to land, forever changed by the rhythm of a world without sky. Segment 2, The Quiet Fall of Oleg Penkovsky, the British double agent who saw too much. A calm, eerie life behind a desk before the storm. Imagine now a small, windowless office, the kind that might exist in any government building. Gray walls, muted carpet, the faint tick of a wall clock. It is 1961, and you are in Moscow. Not in a submarine this time, but in an equally confined and pressure-filled space. The quiet, measured life of a man who walks with secrets too heavy to share. This is where we meet Oleg Penkovsky, a man of quiet tension. Not the dashing figure of spy novels, not a character built for chase scenes or high-stakes glamour, but rather a disciplined officer, a colonel in Soviet military intelligence. His face unreadable, his voice low, his steps measured. He moved through the halls of power with practiced ease, carrying reports, shaking hands, attending meetings where every word was weighed, and every silence, even more so. To those around him, he was loyal to the state, to the Soviet Union. But beneath the surface, like the submarine we just left there, was another current running. Penkovsky had made a decision, quietly, deliberately, to betray the system that raised him. Why? The answer, as always, is not simple. Was it ideology? A moral protest against the growing recklessness of the Soviet military machine? Or was it ego? Frustration at being overlooked, mistrusted, sidelined? Or was it simply fear? Fear that the Cold War was no longer a game of strategy, but one spark away from mutual annihilation. He began leaving breadcrumbs, subtle gestures in London, small slips of paper, carefully worded conversations with contacts in the West. And then he crossed the line. Through a British businessman acting as an intermediary, Penkovsky made contact with British and American intelligence, and what he gave them was vast, thousands of pages, photos of documents, details of missile capabilities, Soviet nuclear strategies, even floor plans of military installations, and all of it was delivered calmly, collected during quiet hours, smuggled out in hollowed-out pens, concealed in mundane packages, shared in whispered meetings, in crowded. His information would go on to play a pivotal role during the Cuban Missile Crisis. It helped the United States understand the true limitations of Soviet missile systems. It brought the world, momentarily, back from the brink. But for Pinkovsky, the walls were already closing in. The Soviet state is not quick to accuse. It watches. It waits. Files are opened. Phones are tapped. Shadows begin to follow him home. Yet still, Pinkovsky walks to work each day. Still, he files his reports. Still, he smiles faintly at the security guards. There is a strange stillness to his final months. He must have known. There are reports that he grew anxious, that his steps quickened, that his hands shook when he lit a cigarette, but he kept going, until one day the quiet life ended. He was arrested discreetly, taken not with sirens, but with a tap on the shoulder. There was no trial broadcast to the public, only silence. Then whispers. What happened next is still debated. Officially, Pinkovsky was executed in 1963. How exactly is unclear. Some say a pistol, others something more elaborate, more theatrical, but none of it is certain. What we know is this: the man who navigated corridors of intelligence and betrayal did not vanish in a blaze of violence. He faded, slowly, into history, a name in a file, a ghost in the archives, a footnote in the uneasy peace between superpowers. And yet, his quiet fall mattered. He changed the course of the Cold War, not with bombs, but with briefcases, not with threats, but with facts. And for a time, the world exhaled, just a little. Let us now turn from the known to the imagined, from the life of a man who truly lived, to a story that lives mostly in whispers and myths. Segment 3, The Myth of the Soviet Sleep Experiment, a grounded exploration of what we do know about sleep deprivation experiments. Imagine a quiet laboratory room, softly lit and empty, except for a single chair and a small table. Here, researchers have long studied one of the most mysterious parts of human life: sleep. Sleep, essential yet elusive, holds the key to our rest and renewal. But what happens when it is taken away? How long can a person stay awake before the mind begins to unravel? In the 1950s and 60s, during the height of the Cold War, both the Soviet Union and the United States quietly explored these questions. They placed volunteers in isolated rooms, monitored their brains with machines that recorded every flicker of thought and every moment of wakefulness. One famous case in the West was a young student who stayed awake for 11 days. He experienced vivid dreams while awake, confusion, and difficulty focusing. Yet, he recovered fully once sleep returned. Now, consider the story. You might have heard the so-called Soviet sleep experiment. It tells of prisoners sealed in a chamber, forced awake by strange gases, slowly losing touch with reality and descending into madness. But this tale, chilling as it is, belongs more to the world of myth than history. No official records or credible evidence support such an experiment ever took place. Instead, it lives mostly online, in forums and stories told to thrill and unsettle. What we do know is different, but no less fascinating. The Soviets, like others, studied human endurance in isolation. Cosmonauts trained in sensory deprivation tanks, experiencing strange visions and the strange silence of space on Earth. Scientists observed that when deprived of sleep, the mind begins to blur reality with dreams. Time stretches and contracts, and even the strongest will start to see and hear things that aren't there. But this was never a violent descent, nor a tale of horror. It was a careful, controlled study, sometimes uncomfortable, always scientific. Why does the myth endure? Because it taps into a deep fear, being alone, unheard, and slipping away unnoticed. It reminds us how fragile the human mind can be, and how vital rest truly is. Sleep is not weakness, it is repair. Even beneath the surface of the coldest experiments, the body demands it. And with that thought, we leave behind shadowed myths. We rise, slowly, toward a place where silence is soft, and even survival takes on a touch of elegance. Next, we will descend beneath Moscow itself, into secret shelters, built not just for survival, but for the comfort of those who held the reins of power. Segment 4. Moscow's upper-class nuclear bunkers, the hush of wealth, even beneath the surface. With chandeliers and polished concrete, imagine a door in a quiet street in Moscow. It looks ordinary, gray, unmarked, easy to pass by. But behind it is a staircase that leads down and then down again, through thick layers of reinforced concrete. The temperature shifts cooler still. The air hums gently through hidden vents. At the bottom, a heavy steel door opens not to a bare shelter, but to something unexpected. A wide hallway, softly lit. The floor is polished. The walls are smooth and pale, not rough or industrial. This is a private nuclear bunker, built not for the masses, but for those who ruled. High-ranking officials, party elites, men in dark suits who moved silently through corridors of both power and fear. The Cold War cast a long shadow over Moscow. Above ground, ceremonies, speeches, the weight of ideology. Below, quiet preparations. Some bunkers were utilitarian, narrow, damp, functional, but others, hidden beneath government buildings or secret residential sites, were designed to feel familiar, comfortable even. In one, there is a small dining room, a round table, chairs with red velvet cushions, a brass chandelier, overhead dim but elegant. On the walls, framed paintings, forests, still lakes, perhaps a field in spring. There is no window, of course, but the illusion of normal life is carefully maintained. Next door is a lounge, leather chairs, a low bookshelf, perhaps a radio tuned to soft music, and a quiet hum of filtered air circulating overhead. Some rooms are made to resemble hotel suites. A bed, a nightstand with a lamp, a mirror without dust. Everything clean, still ready. These bunkers were stocked with food, not rations in cans, but crates of imported goods, dried meats, wine, coffee, tins of fine tea, whatever might make the weeks or months underground feel less like exile. There were even meeting rooms, large oval tables surrounded by chairs, maps on the walls, telephones that connected that, at least in theory, to the world above. A war could be directed from down here, or so they hoped. Yet, despite the comfort, there was something hollow in these places. No natural light, no bird song, no breeze, the same filtered air, again and again. The same hum of electricity, never quite silent. Outside these walls, concrete sealed off the earth. Beyond that tiff disaster, come only silence. One can imagine the contrast. While average citizens might huddle in metro tunnels, packed tightly, sharing water and bread, waiting for news, the privileged would descend into silence, surrounded by velvet chairs, and polished tables. Listening to the soft tick of a gold-rimmed clock, time would pass differently here. Not faster, not slower, just measured, calm, controlled, confined. Most of these bunkers were never used for emergencies. Some were converted to archives. A few became museums. One still functions quietly, unknown to most, hidden beneath the feet of the modern city. Dust gathers on the chandeliers. The tables are set, but no one dines. The beds are made, but no one sleeps. And the air, filtered, clean, timeless, still waits. And now we slowly rise from these underground worlds, back into the quiet of our own rooms, safe, warm, above ground. Let us now bring this journey to a gentle close. You are still here, with the soft hum of history behind you, and the quiet of the present all around. We have drifted through corridors of silence, underwater, underground, and in the shadowed spaces of memory and myth. We've breathed the same recycled air as Cold War sailors, waited in the hush of Moscow's bunkers, and tiptoed through the blurred edge between real science and imagined fear. We've sat quietly beside a man who betrayed a nation with paper and thought, all of it behind closed doors, all of it wrapped in stillness. History does not always shout. More often, it waits, in quiet rooms, in unread letters, in the muffled rhythm of a life beneath the surface. And maybe that is what this night has been, a kind of listening, not for noise, but for the echoes that remain. When the world above is asleep, the Cold War is over now. Submarines rise, bunkers gather dust. Secrets grow soft at the edges, and the men and women who lived those long, quiet days have mostly gone to their rest. Yet their stories remain, not to excite or alarm, but to remind us how much of life is made in repetition, in silence, in waiting. So now, wherever you are, in bed, on a couch, with moonlight on your walls, you can let your own breath slow. You can soften your eyes. There are no alarms here, no gas, no metal doors, no coded transmissions, just the comfort of stillness, the calm of knowing that the world continues, and the gentle rhythm of your own heart finding its way back to rest. Thank you for being here tonight. You may already be drifting. If not, you soon will be. Good night and sleep well. You are safe now, above the surface, and far from the cold silence of the past. Welcome to another quiet journey into the long-forgotten rhythms of the ancient world. Tonight, we will drift gently back through the soft mists of time, to the age of bronze weapons and whispered legends, to a place where myth and memory mingle on the shores of a distant sea. This is the world of Troy, not the city of shining marble and noble duels, but a world of damp tents, sleepless soldiers, and years of waiting, of bitter bread, biting insects, and the long silence between battles. While poets may sing of heroes and gods, the truth, as it often is, was far more tedious and far more human. This story is not told in shouts or songs, but in slow footfalls on muddy earth, in weary eyes staring into campfires, and in the soft clatter of bronze on bone. Our journey tonight is divided into 4 gentle chapters, each one an unfolding layer of the world behind the siege of Troy. First, we'll settle into the daily life of a common Greek soldier in the camp outside the city walls. Not a hero, just someone like you, trying to endure. Then, we'll follow the quiet unraveling of a man called Achilles, famed in epic, but fragile beneath the armor. After that, we'll explore the lingering mystery of the Trojan horse, a story half believed and half invented, and still puzzling. And finally, we'll step inside the quiet chambers of Troy's king, to feel what it was like to rule a city slowly being encircled by fate. For now, find stillness, let your thoughts soften, and prepare to walk among the weary thousands who lived and died beneath the great walls of Troy. Let us begin. Segment 1. WHY. You wouldn't last a day at the siege of Troy. Imagine yourself waking before the sun has broken the gray horizon, inside a fraying tent of animal hide, held up by wooden poles that creak in the wind. The ground beneath your back is hard, always hard. Even with reeds beneath your cloak, the dampness creeps in through the soil. There's a musty scent, a mix of sweat, old leather, and the faint sweetness of decay. You reach for your cloak, stiff with yesterday's sweat, and wrap it tighter as the sea breeze rolls in. You are not a hero. You are not Achilles. You are a spearman, one among many, one of thousands who have waited here in this makeshift city of tents for nearly a decade. Outside, the camp is stirring. Slowly, there is no morning bugle, no urgent command, just the sound of soft shuffling, coughing, and the thump of feet against earth. Someone is already baking flatbread over a tiny flame. The scent of singed flour is the most comforting smell you'll encounter today. You step out of your tent and stretch. Your joints crack, not from age, but from the constant strain of crouching, standing, marching, waiting. A flea bites at your calf. You scratch, but it's never the only one. This is the siege of Troy. But there is no assault today. There hasn't been one in weeks. Sometimes months pass without a true battle. The walls of Troy remain tall, unbroken, just across the plain, close enough to see figures move upon them, too far to hear their voices. You watch them sometimes. They watch you back. Most days are like this. You fill your water skin. It tastes slightly brackish. The spring nearby is shared by the entire camp. It's run low more than once. Illness has taken some of your comrades, not in battle, but in bed, shivering, coughing, their breath going thin before the healer even arrives. You are given your ration, a slab of dried fish, a piece of bread hardened by salt air, and, if you're lucky, a few olives. You chew slowly. There is no rush. Time passes like smoke here, curling, drifting, ungraspable. The men around you are restless. Some whittle bits of wood. Others dice with stones. Some sit in silence, staring at the sea as if waiting for a ship that will never return. Stories are told, often the same ones, of wives left behind, of gods who whispered in dreams, of the day Achilles might fight again. You train when ordered to. Your spear is heavy and worn smooth by use. You grip it as you lunge at a straw dummy again and again until your arms ache and your tunic clings to your chest, not because of any coming battle, but because training is all that breaks the boredom. There are arguments, of course. Men fight over food, over dice, over nothing at all. The captains try to keep order, but tempers fray in this long, anxious wait. You've seen fists fly, and worse, you've seen blood spilled over a miscounted loaf. The nights are the worst. The wind howls through the fabric of the camp. Fires crackle weakly. The stars wheel above, silent and indifferent. You lie awake, often, staring at the dark above you, listening to the coughs and snores and quiet sobs of the men around you. Sometimes a friend doesn't wake. Sometimes You help dig the pit yourself, quietly, quickly. There is no ceremony, no priest, just a stone to mark a name. Only a few remember. You dream of the city, the one just across the plain. You've never stepped inside its walls. You wonder what they eat, whether they sleep more easily than you do. You wonder if they're afraid. But mostly, you feel forgotten, left by kings, used by captains, and watched by gods who do not answer. This is not the Troy of poetry. This is the Troy of waiting, of mildew, stale rations, and cold bronze, of heat by day and chills by night, of discipline, exhaustion, and the slow erosion of hope. You would not last a day. Most don't, not really. They endure, they survive, but they do not last, and still, the war continues. Segment 2. Achilles' meltdown. The real turning point. The camp, though vast, has a center, not a true heart, but a kind of quiet gravitational pull. A tent that is larger than most, with spears planted at its corners, and guards who say little but see everything. This is where Achilles sleeps, or rather, where he once did. For now, the tent remains shut. The man inside is silent. You may know Achilles as the greatest of the Greeks, a warrior whose speed and fury were unmatched. But here, in the soft weariness of this siege, his legend is quieter, more delicate, shaped not just by battle, but by something even older, by pride and by pain. Let us step back for a moment. The war at Troy, as you may recall, did not begin with Achilles. He did not start it. He did not even command it. That was Agamemnon, king of kings, lord of many, a man of authority, if not always of wisdom. Achilles, though young, had been promised honor, glory, a place in the songs of future generations, and for a time he believed it. But even legends have limits. It began, as so many tragedies do, with a woman, not Helen, but Briseis. A woman taken as a prize after a battle, claimed by Achilles as his own. She was no more free than any captive, but to Achilles she was not just a symbol, she was a companion, perhaps even something more, though history does not record her voice. Then came Agamemnon. In a moment of pride and insult, the High King demanded Briseis be taken from Achilles as compensation for his own lost captive. A public gesture, a brutal slight. Achilles, already weary of the politics of war, felt the thread snap, and so he withdrew. He did not shout, he did not strike, he simply stepped back, retired to his tent, refused to fight, let others die in his place. This was not cowardice, it was something more complex. A quiet fury, a statement, a man who had been used one too many times by those who believed themselves above him. Imagine him there in the days that followed. His armor hangs unused, his sword remains sheathed. He listens to the noise of the camp, the gossip, the arguments, the cries of the wounded, and he does nothing, not because he is weak, but because he believes he has already given too much. You might think this is the act of a petulant child, but it is also something deeper, the rebellion of someone who has seen the cost of fame, and now questions the value of glory bought with the blood of friends. Achilles does not smile much in these days. His closest companion, Patroclus, worries for him, tries to soothe him, brings him food, sits in silence, and the war goes on. The Trojans begin to push back. Without Achilles, the Greeks falter. Men who once fought with boldness now look over their shoulders. Morale wanes, casualties rise. Still, Achilles stays. He dreams of the sea, of the land he came from, of his mother, the goddess Thetis, who warned him, if he stayed at Troy, his name would live forever. But he would not. This is the moment before the breaking point, the turning of the tide, not on the battlefield, but in the mind of a man. Then comes the day Patroclus goes to him, not with comfort, but with a plea. Let me wear your armor, he says. Let me fight in your name. Let the men believe you've returned to the field. And Achilles, torn between pride and loyalty, agrees. He gives Patroclus his armor, his image, his legend, and watches him ride away. He does not sleep that night. The next day, Patroclus does not return. Word arrives like a slow, bitter wind. Hector, prince of Troy, has slain him, mistaking him for Achilles, stripping away not just life, but the illusion of the hero himself. Something changes then. Achilles does not weep, not at first. He does not scream, but his silence becomes heavier. His grief is not loud, it is cold, immovable, a mountain of mourning. When he does rise, it is not for glory, it is for vengeance. But that story belongs to another night. What matters here, in this quiet reflection, is that the greatest warrior of his age was brought low, not by blade, but by insult, by grief, by the slow erosion of belief in what he once fought for. This was the turning point, not a charge on horseback, but a moment of stillness, a man choosing absence, and discovering that even heroes are fragile. The tent remains in the middle of the camp. It flaps in the wind, empty sometimes, heavy with silence. A monument not just to rage, but to the quiet undoing of a man the world thought unbreakable and still. The war continues. Segment 3. The horse that never was. You know the story. A great wooden horse, hollow and immense, left at the gates of Troy. The Greek army seemingly vanished. The Trojans, curious, perhaps suspicious, but finally triumphant. They roll the structure into their city, unaware that within its belly weight Greek soldiers, silent, still, holding their breath until nightfall. Then fire, death, victory, the fall of Troy. It is a story etched deeply into Western memory, retold in paintings, poems, and endless retellings. But tonight, let us step carefully through the veil of myth. Let us ask, not as poets, but as listeners, did the horse ever truly exist? And if not, what did? Our first challenge is the silence. Homer's Iliad, the earliest and most influential telling of the Trojan War, ends before the horse appears. It tells of rage, of Achilles, of duels and funerals, but not of the horse. The tale of the wooden creature comes later in the Odyssey, and more fully in the Aeneid, written by Virgil centuries after the supposed fall of Troy. By then, the story has changed hands many times, molded by cultures, echoed in rituals, and repurposed as a parable. Archaeologists, when they excavated the layers of Troy, and there are many Troys, stacked atop one another like sedimentary time, found no remnants of a massive wooden object, no axle grooves, no scorched remains of a hidden army's gateway. But of course, wood rarely lasts that long, so we consider the alternative. One theory suggests the horse was never a physical object, but a metaphor, perhaps a siege engine, a battering ram or large-scale transport that looked like a horse only in name or form. Some believe it may have been a ship. Hippos, the Greek word for horse, was sometimes used for certain types of vessels. Others propose a more symbolic reading. The horse, in this view, was not an object, but a betrayal, a priest, a spy, a gatekeeper, someone within Troy who let the Greeks in. The story of the horse became a metaphorical container, hiding the discomfort of treachery behind a narrative of trickery. And then there is the spiritual leading. In many ancient rituals, the horse was a sacred animal, a bearer of offerings, a symbol of divine will. Perhaps the structure left at Troy's gates was an offering, meant to lull the Trojans into belief, into confidence, a sacred gift left by a retreating enemy. Or perhaps it was real, built with patient hands and deliberate cunning, large enough to hold a small group of elite warriors, rolled on wheels, disguised as tribute, pulled within the gates by a people who longed, above all, to believe that the war was over. Belief, after all, is powerful. After 10 years of siege, after the loss of sons and food and light and quiet, to believe in peace is an overwhelming thing. The true story we may never know, but what we can know is the pattern. Tales like this exist across cultures, of cities undone not by armies, but by what they welcome inside. The horse becomes not a relic, but a recurring echo, a whisper from history that danger often wears a pleasing shape. Tonight, though, we do not dwell on danger. We consider the stillness of the idea, the craftsmanship it would have taken, the slow, careful nailing of planks by firelight, the hushed breath of soldiers tucked into its walls, the groaning of wheels on stone, the flicker of torchlight, just soft, creaking wood and hopeful eyes watching from the walls. Whether it happened or not, the horse remains, not as fact, but as symbol, a reminder that stories outlast stone, and that sometimes belief is more enduring than truth. And still, the war continues. Segment 4. Inside the halls of Priam, the walls of Troy rise tall above the plains, built with immense stone blocks and crowned with towers that catch the morning light. For years, they have held inside those walls. Life continues, not untouched, but enclosed, protected, perhaps, but not at peace. Imagine yourself within the palace of King Priam. The air is thick with resin and incense. There are tapestries draped along the stone, not for decoration alone, but to soften the cold and catch the damp. Footsteps echo in the halls, slow and deliberate. You walk past servants carrying bowls of pomegranate, pitchers of honeyed wine, and small baskets of salted bread. Children laugh in a far room, but it is a quiet laughter, the kind that knows not to echo too far. At the center of it all sits Priam, king of Troy, father of 50 sons, and a man weathered by time. He wears no crown. His garments are soft linen, finely woven, but worn at the edges. His beard is white, full, but thinning. His eyes are the clearest part of him, pale, searching, and tired. He does not speak quickly. He listens. At his side stands Hecuba, his queen. She watches as well, standing straight despite the weight she bears. Together they rule a city besieged, not just by armies, but by doubt. The palace is not as grand as stories might suggest. It is functional, a home to generations. There are courtyards with fig trees, rooms for scribes, for offerings, for sleep. There is a chamber where the names of the dead are kept, whispered aloud each evening by a priest who barely recalls when the list was short. Meals are taken together, not in feasting halls, but in smaller gatherings. Olive oil, lentils, bread soaked in broth, wine is diluted. No one speaks of indulgence. The war has made even kings careful. Outside, in the city, the people murmur. They queue for water. They repair walls, gather herbs, tend to their animals. Routine is their refuge. They rise early, tend fires, share stories, and wait, just as they did the day before. Inside the halls, strategy is discussed in hushed voices. Hector, Priam's eldest, bears much of the burden now. There are nights when Priam walks alone. He touches the stones of the palace, whispers to them. He has lived through prosperity and plague, through marriage feasts and morning chants. And now, he wonders, how much longer these walls will remember his name. He dreams of his youth, of simpler summers before ships appeared on the horizon. He thinks of Helen, not with anger, but with weariness. So much has been burned for the sake of one face. And yet, it is not really her, is it? It is the pride of kings, the silence of gods, the stubbornness of men. In private, Priam writes. He inscribes names on wax tablets, notes the changes in the winds, records dreams. He believes in signs, not blindly, but patiently. Each flicker of the stars, each flight of birds, he logs with quiet precision. He is not a hero in bronze. He is not a god-king. He is a father, a husband, a ruler, trying to hold the threads of a fraying tapestry. You would not find shouting here, no war chants, only the rustle of fabric, the drip of oil into a lamp, the murmur of advisors who do not know how to stop what is coming, because Priam knows the war cannot last forever. And when it ends, it will not end gently. But for now, he holds his court, he listens, he answers. He watches the flames in the brazier flicker and hiss. He counts the days, and he waits. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters. Inside, the king leans back and wonders if tomorrow will be the day the gates are breached, and still the war continues.